I'll just preface some of my readings by saying I've just been, we're sort of encouraged in this group to come with what we've been praying about and what we've been thinking about. And I've just been thinking a lot about relationships and um, the labels that, sort of the human experience seems to put on people. Maybe they're good people, they're bad people, they're easy people, they're difficult people, there are really ambitious people, or there are lazy people, or kind people, or really self-centered people. And I'm sure as I said those things, people flashed in your head that you might identify with those words. And I think it's just something that like our human experience wants to condition to us to kind of a labeling, whether it's like in, conversation or TV or movies or books, or the way that even like at like work, we do personality tests for team building sometimes. This person is this way, and that makes them relating to them challenging type of idea. And I've just really been praying a lot about how Christian Science, we're encouraged to see people as God sees them. And how can we like really do that in a way where our changed perception can change our experience, right, of relating to people. I had you mentioned, Rita, you're registered for class instruction in June. My teacher always said, that what's in your human consciousness equals your human experience. So HC equals HE. Um, and, so I really, want to put a lot of stock into that. Okay, so what I'm holding in my thought about someone is going to make them show up that way. But there's this great article, it's a 1958 Sentinel article that got me thinking about this topic today, and it's called The Law of Right Relationships. And it starts, we have international relations, public relations, social relations, labor relations, family relations, just plain relations. The question of human relations in general is one of the most demanding problems. Much depends on how we meet the inevitable situations of relationship. Whenever two persons meet, there is a problem of human relations, and there is a right way of handling every domestic, business, or social contact. And Christian Science reveals this way, which is entirely consistent with the teachings of the Bible, especially as found in the words and works of Christ Jesus. And that led me to another article that is called, Are You Having Family Problems? And that's sort of where I wanted to start, with just this idea of, personal relationships. I think Joel had put it out there as, how can our view of changing our view, using Christian Science to help us really, change our view of other people, help us in our personal relationships. And I think this idea that, family problems are natural, right? The people that we love the most can be the most difficult to get along with, and it's kind of commonly accepted. You're going to have family problems. People in your family are going to drive you nuts because they are this way or that way. But this article talks a lot about what family really is, and it pulls from Science and Health that immortals, or God's children in divine science, are one harmonious family. And the happy family experience that we seek exists, but in divine mind, in God. It is the family of God's ideas, the real man, far beyond the physical, biological fact of parent and offspring. In its highest human expression, family includes security, unity, and love. And these conditions come from God and exist independently of physical circumstance. God's ideas are universally present, ready to be recognized and used, as much as the multiplication table is forever present and available. And I thought that was a really great way to start, was just this idea that, we all want a happy, right, family, happy personal relationships, and just that ability to claim it as existing, in divine mind, in God, was really grounding for me in terms of just re reestablishing in my thought that who we really are ideas. We're ideas of God, and that's who everybody is. And we're constantly all expressing those ideas that give us a sense of family. Um, and I just thought this was an interesting um, way to apply this. So there was another, I love in Christian Science, the Christian Science Publishing Society puts out a lot of little pamphlets. Um, and I've ordered tons of them. But there's one called Love and Marriage. And there's an article, they usually have like 3 or 4 articles in them. There's a little article in this called Maintaining a Marriage, and it tells of a healing that is similar to ones that I've read a lot about and been curious about. So there was a woman who was married to someone she believed was struggling with alcoholism. And she decided that she was divorcing him because she had reached the end of her rope. She had prayed so long for peace and harmony in her home and in their home. And this article goes on, the woman tried, but wasn't able to reason with her husband about the addiction. And then a thought came that stunned her. For so long, she had been blaming him for the alcoholism. But the need was to see that as God's man, he was actually spiritually and mentally free from the claim of disease and sin. In one sense, she had believing her own susceptibility too. His addiction may have been in drinking, but she had an addiction as well, letting the alcoholism become a reality. And from that moment, the woman concentrated on healing herself of the belief that such an addiction was real or incurable. And obviously, there was a really harmonious and wonderful healing. And I think this just brings up a interesting point that I thought maybe would be good to get your thoughts on in personal relationships. What are we believing? What have we accepted? What are we witnessing? Um, and I found all this kind of helpful because for me, the um, like the chapter in Science and Health on marriage sometimes can feel a little unrelatable or outdated. There are nuggets of wonderful truth in that, but I've really enjoyed, especially when praying about relationships, using the periodicals, some of these pamphlets, reading other ways that they're being applied so that it just helps, I don't know, me see a different way to think about relationships. There's this other article that I read, and it was in another pamphlet called Family Problem Healed. And this article talks about a woman whose 11-year-old daughter was driving her up the wall. She threw tantrums, was disruptive, and just made their home life miserable. Discipline just aggravated the situation. And one day, my friend was praying to try to see her daughter's perfection as a child of God. And suddenly, she, the mother, realized that she was the undisciplined child in the family. And she was the one that had flaws and blemishes. One moment she was proclaiming the truth of man as the child of God for her daughter, and in the very next breath, she was condemning and blaming the child for being disobedient or unmanageable or unloving. And so there was, again, a great healing once the mother saw discipline as a spiritual quality that she could express and really regulate her response and truly be prayerfully seeing her daughter as the child that God had made and molded her as a spiritual and perfect idea. So for me, a lot of the readings that I came across that I thought started me on a path to thinking about the answer to this question were really about the humility that Christian Science points us to, that, we really need to take responsibility for how we are seeing other people, um, and, follow the manual instruction, right? In terms of our duty, uh, as Christian scientists, but to really see people as they are and to really examine in any time that we are finding challenges in a personal relationship. Well, what are we contributing to that? How are we seeing them? How are we holding them? What are we claiming that's real about them? So I'll pause there and see if anybody has any reactions to that, questions, around that? Things they've learned that maybe have helped them.
I think the topic, it's funny, we've talked about relationships off and on the last couple of weeks in different ways, different aspects of it. But what you just brought out is actually something I've been kind of working through in my own life, which is it's interesting. So my wife and I met at Principia, and we were both Christian Scientists from families in Christian Science. And at the time when I was there, I felt like she was like this like sage, like visionary. Like if I had any questions about Christian Science, like she knew the answer. She was tuned into God, listening to it. And I was like, wow, this is just exactly what I needed. And we both went through class instruction. And in recent years, she had a good friend of hers that also went through Principia with us pass on. And it was really tough for her because we went and visited her many times and she tried to help her and worked with practitioners and things, but it wasn't something that seemed to yield. And so it felt like it kind of shook her faith a bit. And that's something that I've had challenges with because on the other hand, I feel like I've really, and I don't want it to sound like, one's better than the other. I just like, I feel I've been able to really distill in the last couple of years and really like get clear on and trust in that sense of the Christ that brings healing. So the challenge has been, I never felt like when I grew up that I had a really good, like, I guess you could say bedside manner with like having compassion. And maybe that's just the label of being a male that, doesn't express emotions or whatever. But a lot of times, like, if there was a problem, like there's a very simple, like you'd find the solution and fix it. And of course, guys just want to fix things. There's another label. But so it's been challenging because there's so many little things that seem to challenge her physically at times, and myself too. Like, I'm not materially perfect by any means, obviously spiritually perfect. But there's things where I want to, and even with my kids, like I want to help them, but I have to like develop the skill set of like how to comfort and how to love. It's kind of like you were saying, how to see them, because that's totally on me. If I'm viewing as anything less than God sees them, if I'm bearing witness to a challenge being real, then I'm contributing to it. So you gave me a lot to think about with rejecting. Obviously, a Christian Science practitioner healer, you can't heal if you start from the premise of seeing a problem that needs to be fixed. Like that's the whole goal of switching the light on, is to see people as they are, to see them as God sees them. And I tell my kids this all the time. So I guess it's in a way just good to put it back on myself instead of trying to fix other people.
Yeah, right. I know I've faced that a lot too. And with my own parents, I have one parent who's much deeper in Christian Science and really wants to connect with my other parent who isn't as deeply. And even just that labeling of you're into Christian Science and you're not, right? Even like kind of helping, and the one who's more into it is my dad, recognize labeling my mom that way isn't going to help her be more receptive. I do that with my kids. Having this notion that if I bring up prayer or that as a way to tackle a problem, they're going to push back, right? That's not going to make them more receptive. And that's really up to me to enter each day looking at everyone as a Christian Scientist, as receptive, as leading from one mind. But it is really hard sometimes, right? Because you're like, you're being a jerk or you're being so stubborn. But it's amazing how many labels, right, in our attempt to relate to other people that we put out and how limiting those labels are in our progress. And that's what I've really been trying to work on. And all these articles, as I've been looking on the personal side, have just really led me so much to humility and really digging in and looking at myself and how I am viewing every person and really like taking the, like the opportunity to build up the muscle. Like, what is that person? What is that like? Almost do it on an individual basis to really make sure I'm testing myself with how I'm meeting and perceiving everyone, and avoiding, right? But I find myself labeling all the time and having to be like, why am I doing that?
Well, and that's where the healing happens. Mrs. Eddy talks about how, Jesus beheld in science the perfect man, and that's what allowed him to heal, where, sinning mortal man appeared to mortals. So yeah, that's really the change that has to happen. It's in our own consciousness that we have to get clear, because at the end of the day, as it says in First John, we're all children of God. Like there isn't like, oh, here's like the blessed children, here's like, the children that don't get it, or here's the children that are like, fumbling around. It's like we're all the children of God, and that God doesn't make those delineations. That's just mortal thought. So it's a great reminder to be clear in one's own thinking.
Um, for me, it's working on being humble. I've become more humble over my lifetime. When my husband met me, well, we started dating, he would say, you're such a know-it-all, and I think that as an only child, I was kind of, I was put on a pedestal by my parents, basically told you are perfect because you exist, not spiritually, just materially perfect. And so I think I was probably pretty judgmental of people. And, that's easy to do when you think you're kind of like, okay, I'm well educated. I have my life pulled together. I'm in a functional relationship and seem to be doing pretty well there, And so you start to go, well, what's wrong with you and you? And why can't you be more like that? And why aren't you more receptive to the truth? And so just going, whoa, 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 I don't know everything. Goodness gracious. And I'm not perfect. I mean, God knows me as perfect, and that relationship is perfect. But I certainly don't need to go around just judging everybody, even my own family members, husband, mother. I don't know what they're going through. I'm not in their shoes. And so to just stop being so judgmental, and it's not my perspective, like your question, it's God's perspective. So not comparing them to me, that's silly. That's like 2 + 2 = 5. It's like they're different things. They're never going to be like me to someone else has nothing to do with their experience. So just humbling myself and going, I wonder how you feel about this thing and why that might be the right answer or a really cool thing to investigate. So, I think that can really help because in my relationship with my husband, I'm more into Christian Science, so I can certainly be like, well, if you would just pray about that, it would, you know. Um, but again, then I can't make him do it, and so to be annoyed or whatever is fruitless, and so just to love, hope he's well, know that he's on his own path to finding the truth, and the truth is loving him right now. And so just take myself off that little high horse and kind of just be a little more humble and kind. Thanks, Lord.
That's awesome. Humility is really, really hard.
Or maybe it's easy and it just wants us to think it's hard.
That's true too.
Yeah,
That's true.
I love what you said, Bonnie, about judgment, because I learned recently that you can't help someone if you judge them. So that's something I've been working on as well, because it's easy to judge, and that's what, people do back and forth, and people get nowhere. And it's like you really have to remove yourself and just let God be the judge. Like it's our job just to love and to see as people are, see the good in people.
Yeah, and claim all the true qualities of them, at that very simple like Porter game of, would you let this one in? Why would you label somebody as right, bad, non-receptive, difficult, right? Not as into Christian Science, right? Just kind of being more absolute and relative, I guess, in the way you think about people, has been a good mental exercise for me as well. right? And catching myself when I'm like, oh, well, my mom's just not as into Christian Science. I'm like, no, she is into Christian Science, right? Everyone is into Christian Science. She just doesn't sometimes know it. She has to claim it, but she is, right? And who she really is. Any other thoughts on that? Um, well, another thing that I was thinking about was how we can improve relationships that we don't even control. So obviously in our personal relationships, those are ones that we've nurtured, right? We've chosen, they're in our family, but sometimes we don't get to choose, who governs us, or who runs our company, or who, as I talk to my kids about, who teaches our class, right? Who that teacher is. And so that another great article that helped me quite a bit in thinking about this is from the 1979 Monitor. And it's by Edwin Lever, and it's called No, You're Not Trapped. And it starts with that boxed in feeling. And it says, not one of you has to go through life like Charlie Brown, that lovable, bald-headed little boy in the Peanuts comic strip. Charlie gets locked into one bad situation after another and stays there. And the article kind of jumps to, what can you do? Well, you can find your freedom. That's what you can do. And it talks about him facing job pressure and feeling really trapped. And he said, one day I walked away from my desk and I began pacing in the corridor outside the area we worked in. Like the psalmist, I cried out to God to deliver me from all of this. Why did I have to be in the middle of this? Why me? And I'll be honest, tears came. This job had really gotten to me. Then I thought of some of the Bible verses that I'd been reading that morning, and they brought out that nothing could separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. He goes on to say, I suddenly glimpsed something I hadn't seen before. Nothing could separate me, the man I really was, God's man, the man made in God's image, from the love of God. No job, no situation, no drawn out program could separate me that very moment from the love of God. And you know what happened? Months of frustration and despair fell off my shoulders. I was free. Nothing had changed on my job. In fact, when I went back to my desk, I had more work than ever to do. But I now knew that I was free. Nothing could keep me in bondage because I had accepted my inseparability from God. And no matter who we are in relationship with, we are not separated from God. And I love this part of the article too. We see what true freedom is and what it is not. It's of God, good. It's not licensed to do whatever we want to do. True freedom uplifts us, gets us more in tune with God. It doesn't pull us down to self-will, self-righteousness, self-indulgence, or self-gratification. It liberates us from any self-centered obsession or attraction of evil or the carnal mind. And I just really liked that way of thinking about, no matter who it seems we are in relationship with, and that relationship we might find dominating, frustrating, feel trapped by it. We can't be separated from God. And that lack of separation and that acknowledgement and acceptance of God's love can make us truly free of feeling out of control or controlled by any other relationship that maybe we felt like we don't want to be part of or we want freedom from. And just really acknowledging kind of who's in charge. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts that have helped them in that sense when they've been in trying to navigate something, a relationship, maybe outside of a personal relationship, more of a work relationship, or even, kind of bigger picture government type of relationship that's been challenging.
I think I've shared it here before, but I had a really nice healing for myself and for a work situation. when I was working in a small unit of this organization, um, and uh, it occurred to me that rearranging how her desks were would be more efficient because we could communicate better. And I checked with my immediate boss, and it was all good. And then the like overall head boss came through after we had rearranged and just started yelling at me. It just, and I did not absorb any of that. There was something in that moment. I don't know if it was, my own spiritual preparation that day or something, but something in that moment allowed me to really just separate this behavior from both myself and from him and realize that this was not, this was not us. This was not our relationship. This was not, and it wasn't normal for the workplace. Um, and so I just kind of let this flow over me. It didn't last very long. And shortly after that, it was all resolved and there wasn't any lingering, um, problem or conflict or anything. But it was such a lesson because like most people, I would tend to have a reaction, an instant reaction to being yelled at angrily. And in this case, I could see, because, I knew enough of his good qualities, of his spiritual qualities to have a feeling of who he was and what his values and all were. And and I knew that of myself as well. I wasn't doing something reckless. I wasn't doing something that was way out of the bounds of what should be done in this office. I was doing something to express a better sense of unity and communication and productivity. And to this day, that idea of taking a breath, calmly responding, spiritually responding to it, to even a heated situation, has really stayed with me and reinforced my desire to, in every situation, to respond thoughtfully and spiritually rather than uh, emotionally and materially, and just like I'm responding in kind to something that's rearing its head at me. Um, and I haven't had another moment like that, but I certainly have had lots of moments where taking that breath, taking that moment to, whether you consider it saying a little prayer or just reminding myself of who I am, what the situation is, what the other person is, that their real identity is a child of God, just like mine, and that we cannot be having conflict, um, and that inevitably helps lead to a resolution, of some sort. It's not, there's no magic formula, but listening in that moment, I found always helps lead to a resolution. And that one example is going to keep feeding me for a long time as well.
I wonder, Scott, if maybe the reason you haven't had another experience like that is because you're naturally reacting to situations and seeing the other person spiritually. I have that react when you were talking about that, it reminded me of things I've read, and I'm sure you guys have heard of these types of situations too, but I've read some testimonies where like someone was held up at gunpoint or in a really scary situation, and they were so ready to see that person as the child of God that it just diffused instead of reacting with a normal human, right, expected reaction, that it diffused the situation and they were safe and harmony prevailed and they walked away or they didn't take the money or whatever that was. And I just wondered, I think, right, I noticed that in my own life, and I think this is what Jesus did too. The more you practice it, the less you see the material, right? The more you're practicing seeing people as they really are, the less you even are like even notice if they're showing up any humanly. If they show up any differently, it sort of washes over you because you're just seeing the truth. I don't know.
Thanks for the topic, Laura, and for everybody that shared so far. I can share a little bit about your question, but I thought I would start by just saying I have gone into work meetings before where I was making a decision to take on a new responsibility, or I was hoping that my employer would be open to me taking on a new responsibility. And before I even went into the meeting, I just really got a sense of the one mind, right? There's one mind, not many minds. There's not all these little human minds. And I'm trying to convince this person of something or vice versa. And it really checked my motive. You know, my motive was I work for a school, and it was for the good of the school. And I wanted to bring this wellness program, which I'm now, run at the school. And yeah, I just felt like I had a really clear sense of the one mind, and it really helped everything just unfold beautifully after that. And, that's just an example of something that is technically out of my control. I was, going to my boss and I was saying, I'd like to take a leave of absence, but I'd love to start this new program. This is how I think it could benefit the children. And, it just unfolded so beautifully. And I think it's, because I was able to have a clear sense of the one mind, and there wasn't a bunch of agenda on my, that I was trying to force upon anybody or anything. So that was a really nice healing situation where I do think it was out of my control, but it was not out of God's mind's control. And so that was a really beautiful demonstration. And I think too that for me, a lot of human relationships can feel like you were talking about earlier, like they're a struggle, and there seems like there's many minds and opinions and faulty humans, and myself included. And so the more I realize when I'm in relationship with someone that there's tension or there's disagreement or difference of opinions or conflict or arguments, the more I need to realize I need to get clear about my one relationship with God, the source of love, the source of kindness, of patience, of honesty, of all the great qualities that we all express. Some of us more than others, but maybe because we're recognizing, hopefully, that we want to express more of God. And so I have a long ways to go on this relationship thing, and I think this is a wonderful topic that we're all probably working on. But yeah, when things seem tough or out of control, I just really trying to work on getting connection with the source, and it's not me, and it's not any of my human relationships. It's that higher power. So, but thanks for this topic. It's great, and love to hear more about what you guys share.
I was kind of laughing as you said that because it just struck me something that I do that I'm like, whoa, I got to change this, because you talked about the one mind. And I'm always like looking at other people and being like, oh, well, they're governed by the one mind. They're governed by the one mind. Clearly they'll be, easier. But where's my mind? Right? It's from the same one mind, right? And that goes back to your point, Bonnie, about a little bit of humility, of like really owning and asking for my own thought to be filled with the one mind and flow from the one mind and be in sync with the one mind, and right, like kind of do that what the early Christian scientists did, sort of with like folding laundry, like separating out the chaff from the wheat, like what is true, right, about my own thinking. The only thing that I could really be thinking is to the source, like you were just talking about, Christy. My ideas can only actually flow from the one mind. So anything that is maybe a wrong thought, it needs to be checked as like, is that really from God? Is that really from the source of the one mind? Am I expressing mind? Am I claiming that I could express a different mind? Do I have a different mind? Right? It's an interesting, thank you for that. That was an interesting, I always love things that sort of wake you up a little bit to, right? Like things you do that you're like, wait a minute. Any other thoughts on that? Oh, go ahead,
I'll
Bonnie.
jump in again. Your question, like who governs us? I feel like in our world, we are very focused on government. It's in the news daily, not just our country, but the world. And it's such a focus. It just, as I was thinking about what I wanted to say, I was thinking it's such like mortal mind winning because it's like, look at me, I'm governing over here and everywhere. And we're so not focused on God, even as a, it seems like as humanity, we get so drawn into who is governing. And I think it can be mesmerizing, who's winning, who's losing, who's right, who's wrong. Like you were talking about in the beginning, all these personalities. Are they annoying? Are they righteous? Are they kind? Are they just? And we take sides, we get in our camp and we stay there. And it's really just to me indicative of mortal mind being like, yay, I'm got all their attention. And so like we often say in this group, it takes practice to not be mesmerized by human government. We can know what's going on, we can understand it, but to not be sort of drawn in, and then to really daily understand who our real governor is, and the government is upon his shoulder and not any one human beings, and to just really establish that daily before your feet hit the floor. Like, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to read the lesson, I'm going to pray, I'm going to establish government, I'm going to say the daily prayer, I'm going to say the Lord's Prayer, I'm going to, remember the sixth tenet and certain things that keep me on track. And then I can kind of handle the day, and then take the news with like interest and prayerful readiness, but not let it like sort of derail you.
Or suck you
It
in.
takes a lot of work. If I'm not saying this, I'm very good at it even. I'm just saying these all on paper, it sounds great. You should all do that. But no, I just mean like, it's a good, even if it's daily, like minute to minute kind of go, oh, right, God's in control. Wait, who is God? God's in control, just sort of remembering, reminding, and establishing that.
As I was, thank you for sharing that. It reminded me of something that I read when I was preparing for today. There's another article called Complete Equipment from the journal, and it's like a really old article from 1937. But it says an amusing story relates that the devil once said to a friend he was going to make a new world. "What are you going to make it out of?" asked the friend. "Oh," replied the devil, "I don't have to make it out of anything. I only have to tell a lie about the one that has already been created." And I think that speaks so much to what you're talking about getting sucked in by government and this idea of who's governing and who's winning and who's losing and who's this and who's that. It's the world exists, God exists. Start with the truth, and that'll help you build your defense. Because all that's going on is just one lie told about the truth, the true existence that already is. And it's like that simple. And if we continue to ground our day and our thinking, right, it's probably why we were instructed to do that and to protect ourselves daily, right, against aggressive mental suggestions, because they do seem to come up all the time. But anyhow, I had kind of giggled at that, and I thought that might be helpful to share too.
Well, and honestly, it was pretty similar in Jesus' time too. I mean, there were, the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees fighting amongst themselves for power, and there was like, the Romans, and even with like Pilate, right? Like he went to Pilate, and Pilate's like, well, I have, say over whether you live or die. And Jesus said, you would have no control over me except that God gave it, any power to you. And, he didn't tell his disciples, he didn't be like, just watch out for those guys. He always came back to God. He always said that, to have our, our fellowship, our understanding. That's why he would always go off into the, the wilderness to pray and to quiet his own thinking when things were really tumultuous in his time and around even the circles he was in. And I love the idea you shared earlier of, when there would be challenging situations like a burglar or something and something tense happening. And it reminded me, my teacher would use a metaphor of, so you basically have pressure or you have tension, right? Tension's when things pull apart, and pressure is when things push together. And so, when somebody yells at you, like you're saying, Scott, or somebody, I don't know, like threatens you or something, if you push against that, that creates the pressure. But if you, like we're circling back to, if God is the only real, force, the only real existence, and we're all expressing God, then there is nothing, and there is no real personal devil. Like we all agree that evil is just as, it's a suggestion that tries to mesmerize people. It's like Jesus, the devil couldn't throw him off the temple. It couldn't make him do anything. It just would whisper these suggestions, or like Adam and Eve, right? Couldn't get Eve to do anything, would just whisper, oh, hey, the tree of knowledge, go check that one out. It'll make you know is God's. It couldn't do anything. And so when we take that away, there is no real evil, no real, if we're not bearing witness to a not true character in someone else, there's nothing to push against. And it's almost like you take that away, and that's where love has the ability to bring healing. So I just also really loved that metaphor.
I like that too. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Other thoughts on that? I had one more sort of question that came up for me. Well, so I think this may be true of a lot of, right, Christian Scientists. We seem to be seekers for truth, and we are, interested in being better and more deeply connected. But instead of looking at like self-help books to improve communications, how can we start with Christian Science and truly learn how to express love, but without being a doormat and not standing up for ourselves? Because I've certainly seen that come up in articles I've read, like, this idea of right, just seeing people for how God sees them and loving, but then how does that show up where we're not feeling like we're just getting walked all over? And there were two things that I found helpful to answering this question. One was in Retrospection and Introspection, on page 91. Mrs. 80 talks about 3 of the leading characteristics of the master, 3 of those Christly qualities that we need for our ministry. And the first is humility, the rarest of all qualities, the one most unlike mortal selfhood. And here it may be argued that humility does not resemble God, that it is a human attribute. But what are the effects of humility? It is closely associated with peace, for it has abandoned the striving to be praised of men, effort for aggrandizement. The desire for prestige is common to all mortals. It takes different forms in different circumstances, according to our different walks of life, but it is foreign to humility, and it is never godlike. God needs no prestige. He does not desire the applause of men. All there is to be, he is. All there is to have, he has. And this is also true of man in his exact image. And for that reason, man manifests the meekness of reflection. To desire human prestige is to be ignorant of our divine status and the majesty of our spiritual being. So that sort of helped me a little bit in thinking about, this resistance to humility, sometimes being, well, I don't want to be a doormat, like I need to stand up for myself, but kind of framing it in that sense of, I don't need to be aggrandized of men. I don't need any prestige I don't need to win. I don't need to be told I'm right, or any of those sorts of things. And then there's a really good article on humility that's in the 1966 journal. And it says a ray of light, not a doormat, is a good symbol for humility. A ray of light can exist only in conjunction with its source. It never operates alone. It is always the expression or emanation of its source. In the same way, true humility is expressed by man, who is dependent on God, mind. The spiritual and perfect man of God's creating is indeed the emanation and expression of his creator. He manifests and reflects the divine qualities. He has no intelligence, life, or existence apart from his Father. The individual who understands such humility finds that it is not enfeebling, but ennobling. It gives one who practices it inspiration and increased capabilities. Maintaining a conscious dependence on mind, he is reassured by the support and strength he feels. Turning to mind for inspiration, he finds ideas flowing into his consciousness from an inexhaustible source, enabling him to manifest originality, inventiveness, creativeness. And Jesus Christ preeminently demonstrated the lovely quality of humility. The New Testament records in several passages his recognition that he was not the power which was responsible for the remarkable works he performed. His constant communing with God, listening to his Father, enabled him to do his work. Even from boyhood, he was about his Father's business, and throughout his life, his aim was to do his Father's will. Mankind generally regard humility as something feeble, ineffective, passive. This false sense of humility, the doormat sense, which would describe man as a miserable sinner. Self-denigration is a form of malpractice, which is destructive, stultifying, and limiting. It is not humility. It dishonors God because it attributes to him an effete creation. An aspect of this false sense of humility is sometimes found in such statements as, just leave it all to God and it will work out. At first sight, this seems to indicate a very humble attitude, but it can also indicate a sense of eliminating man from the situation. At other times, it may be a lazy approach. Man is essential to the situation. Without man, God would be unexpressed, like a sun without rays of sunlight. If there is some problem that needs to be solved, it requires work. Our work in Christian Science is not merely done by leaving it to God, but by praying to realize our unity with the divine mind. Mind is already maintaining the perfect harmony of the universe, and God's laws are operating every moment. If a problem confronts us, we need to work for receptivity to truth, to let the Christ waken the human consciousness to see the harmony and perfection which mind has made and is maintaining. The inspiration and intelligence and energy to do this work derive from God. Recognition of this enables us to do the work effectively and humbly. And every individual human being is faced with the need for self-improvement. The more humbly this need is recognized, the more rapid progress becomes. A clear distinction needs to be made between the perfect man of God's creating and the human being whose present performance falls short of perfection. Humility is needed to detect our shortcomings. If the time and energy devoted to unnecessary criticism of our fellow men were devoted to self-improvement and self-immolation, much more would be accomplished. I thought that was a helpful framework for thinking about, right, how do we improve our communications? How do we ensure we're not just, I don't know, being sort of leaving ourselves out of the situation? And I think it just brings us right back to what we've been talking about in the conversation, is this need to look, kind of within, to look at, being more humble and seeing that as a good thing rather as seeing that as feeble or weak or something that might set us up to not be seen or loved. So I don't know, any thoughts about that?
I think that's one of the passages in the Bible that's always been a little challenging for me, because I love the Beatitudes where he brings out, turn the other cheek, how many times, like 70 times 7, like love your enemy, like give them a cloak if they steal from you. Like there's always a sense, but then you have don't cast your pearls before swine, right? So it's like, so do all these things unless it's someone that's just obviously taking advantage of you. And I think, I think usually it's always best to err on the side of love. I think we've talked in the past that sometimes you might have to love someone from a distance if you're being treated, poorly, or if you're, there's abuse or something that's obviously not healthy, to have some distance, but still to see that, I had that experience growing up. I had, in my teens, my mom married a guy that was verbally and physically abusive. And at the time, it was challenging when I was, 15 and my life was being threatened. And like, I ended up moving out at 17 just because she was kind of in this victim mindset and couldn't leave him. And I was like, you got to pick him or me. And I didn't want to be in that situation. So I moved out. But after the fact, looking back, I see it's someone that he was kind of a boy in a sense that just never really learned like good people skills or how to, deal with addiction or these things that challenged him. And again, it's loving at a distance, but it's also seeing the perfect man, right? The qualities that God knows about this person. We all screw up in life. We all do, things that we probably wish we could change or would have done it differently. But what God sees is the part that's the core, the good in us, the real man. So I've enjoyed that opportunity while also realizing that if I look back in my life, like every major challenge I've had has led me to my biggest things I could be grateful for. So would I do it again? Yeah, because I know that that God's always leading me, and that those challenges have set me up for the blessings. And that's not that we have to go through the junk to have fruit from it, but that's been my experience. And so with that lens, I guess, it's easier to see when there are challenging people in my life to trust the process in a way, trust God that this will unfold however it needs to. I just need to do my part to love, and not to love, the wrong or the whatever people hold on to that's hurtful, but to love the core of someone. And that's again the perspective that can bring healing.
And I think what that article was just kind of encouraging us to do, right, was to do what Scott talked about, right? Just kind of be humble and listen. And then the ideas of how to respond will come. Do I need to move out? Do I need to love at a distance? Where do I, in this human experience, need to relate to this person, right? To have harmony, right? Which is the truth be experienced. But kind of that notion of having a willingness to be humble and not considering it as like letting ourselves just be beat up or take abuse or all those sorts of things. It's just a different framing.
I really like, Laura, how you just broken it down to be very practical, to be humble as a Christian Scientist or just somebody who's following godlike qualities. And then at the same time, don't be a doormat. I think that's so appropriate. And there was a situation at work where I kind of felt like I had been taken advantage of by a woman. And I really didn't want to have feelings of animosity of any kind. And so I reached out to a Christian Science practitioner, and, we talked for a bit, and she said, do you feel like you've been, taken advantage of, or, you feel like you've been betrayed? And I said, yes, I feel like I've been betrayed. And she said, well, she brought to my attention Jesus Christ, right? Jesus was betrayed by, he was crucified, and he still loved, and he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. But at the same time, she said to me, and I thought about that, and I thought, okay, yes, I can pray about that. I can think about that and work to just kind of have a higher perspective about this. And she said, and sometimes, practically speaking, we need to confront people to expose error, so that maybe, it would put a stop to her doing it to someone else, or just so she could understand, that what she did was wrong. And it kind of just, so like you were saying, not to be a doormat, she helped me, grow my backbone, if you will. And I did. I made an appointment, and I went and visited with her, and I spoke my truth, and I said, how I felt. And it felt like a really loving way to approach it. Kind of like, Joel, you've talked about parenting before, and how sometimes we have to practice tough love, rather than just being okay with everything our kids do. You know, oh, we just love them. We're just going to love them regardless. But sometimes we have to use boundaries and teach them consequences and those things. So anyhow, I just appreciate what you were bringing to the table, and I have had to practice that balance, as we all have. And yeah, it's what we rely upon, I think, to get our answers of how to move forward is really important. We're listening. So thank you.
I mentioned this a few weeks ago. I won't go into it, but my daughter has been dealing with a mean girl at school, and it's been, I would say it's full on bullying. And so she goes to Principia, which is a Christian Science school. She loves Christian Science, but she texted like, I know I'm supposed to love her, but I don't even know how to do that. How am I supposed to love this person who's, treating me so badly? And I said, well, we just love. We don't love her personality. Like you said, I'm not trying to love that person in that body with that personality. That's not it. That's too micro. I want you to just love. And so that was really helpful for me too. But then a friend from Sunday school sent me an article from the Sentinel, which is in this month's February 10th Sentinel, when a girl stole my best friend. And how this girl, Holly Wayman, prays about it. And she's like, let's go of all this hurt and anger. She was really treated badly, but then just really prayed about it and had a full healing of her own thoughts. But then 15 years later, that so-called bully reached out to her and wanted to be friends, and so that was such a nice, like, we don't always know the human outcome. It's not even like, well, I'd like a healing now. What does it look like? Wrapped up all neat. Sometimes we just love and heal, and then just it's in God's hands. And then you never know, you just never know, someday comes full circle, and you could be friends with that person or have a whole other relationship or understanding of them that could be very new. So you never really know, but love is always a good answer.
Well,
Right.
and I love how you just brought that up, Bonnie, of the love isn't personal, to like loving a human personality, but that you can't be stopped from expressing love. And I think that's a lot of what Jesus did too, because he was criticized all the time and not appreciated all the time and scorned, and yet it didn't stop him from loving. And look what happened. I think it's the same, right, concept of that we can teach everybody in our way. Thanks for sharing that.
It reminds me of Jesus too, because I feel like Jesus was frustrated a lot with his disciples because they weren't really getting what he was trying to teach, or they, even people would come up to him and be like, your disciples couldn't heal my son. And he's like, how long am I going to be with you guys? Like, you've seen what I've done. You can do this too. And I would imagine that Jesus could have been upset when, Simon Peter was, walking on water and then doubted it and started sinking, or even, when he was, the night before he was crucified, of just being denied 3 times by him. He could have been, upset by these things. That was like the person he, in a sense, trusted the most, or, but he didn't. He trusted, like you said, Bonnie, that trusting the process, trusting God's unfoldment in God's time. And I can relate to that, sometimes wanting a healing to be now, like, could this happen now? That'd be great. But like Simon Peter, became, one of the after, Jesus ascended, like he was one of the people that was out doing the good work. So you don't really know how God's work unfolds. It's just our job, or my job, to be, doing the best that we can along the way, and trust that it's going to unfold beautifully.
I think that's a lot of what these passages on humility are teaching us, right? It just allows us to listen better and to be at one with the one mind. It even brings back what you're talking about, Bonnie, just really making sure that we're looking at the one mind as guiding us in what we're thinking. So.
Well, we're just about time for today. Thank you so much, Laura, for for sharing these ideas, and thanks for everyone for being here. We have these discussions every Tuesday at 4 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock Eastern. And if you have an idea or a topic that would be helpful to you, we do encourage you to share it in our Facebook group, A Healing Light, or you can go to our website, ahealinglight.org, and just reach out and contact one of us if you want to do it kind of privately. But that's what this is here for, is to share this light with others, and to talk about this healing truth, and to have a venue where we can come together and share these healing ideas. So really grateful for each one of you and for all the perspectives shared, and hope you have a wonderful week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so
Joel.
much.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Joel, and
Laura.
everyone.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Nice to see
Bye,
you.
Rita, and